Hey guys, tonight we're traveling to a year so eerie, so cold, and so full of dread, it makes any bad day you've had look like a spa weekend. Imagine a world where the sun fades, the skies turn dull grey, and everything slows. Plants stop growing, seasons seem lost, and people begin to wonder whether daylight will ever truly return. In 536 AD, that wasn't just poetic gloom. That was real. The air thickens with a strange, dry mist. Across Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia, people wake to mornings darker than dusk. The sun, if you can call it that, is a pale disk overhead, as if someone smeared soot across the heavens. It casts no warmth. Its light feels ghostly, like moonlight, even at midday. Procopius, a man not known for exaggeration, wrote that the sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon. People squint skyward and rub their eyes, but the gloom won't lift. Crops begin to fail. A chill seeps into the bones, deeper than weather. And with it comes fear. You probably won't survive this one. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, where are you tuning in from tonight? Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know what part of the world you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts in the early months of 536. Winter should be ending, but something's off. The sun doesn't rise the way it used to. Farmers in Italy think a storm is coming, but the clouds never move. Across the Middle East, the days stay dim, like twilight stretched across weeks. Even in India and parts of China, chroniclers record strange skies, red halos around the sun, and a sudden drop in warmth. No one knows what's happening. But it's not normal. Cassiodorus, a Roman statesman, puts it this way: the sunlight was weak, the sky appeared colorless, the cold pierced to the bone, and it was as if summer had been defeated by winter. That's a bureaucrat trying not to sound terrified. Birds fly lower. Bees vanish. The natural world, always so rhythmic and dependable, starts to glitch. In villages, elders tell stories of eclipses and omens, wondering if this is a sign from the gods. In cities, priests call for prayers, fasts, and sacrifices. And in the countryside, families begin rationing food without knowing why. It's instinctual. Like their bones can already sense what's coming. Historians still argue whether the haze was caused by a massive volcanic eruption, possibly in Iceland or North America, or if it was something else entirely, like a comet impact or asteroid dust. The truth? No one really knows. But ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica do show a sudden, sharp spike in volcanic sulfur from around 536. Whatever it was, it reached the stratosphere and stayed there, blocking sunlight around the globe. And for the first time in centuries, civilization, still reeling from the fall of Rome, looks up at the sky and finds no reassurance. Just a pale blur where the sun should be. By midsummer, panic begins to bloom. Crops don't grow. Wheat stays low and pale. Fruit trees forget how to blossom. In Ireland, grain rots in the field. In Syria, desert nights turn cruelly cold. In China's north, snow falls in midsummer and sticks. Farmers start digging holes in the ice, praying for meltwater. Nothing moves. Even the animals seem confused. Birds abandon nesting sites. Goats stop producing milk. Horses, always fussy, grow anxious. People begin to whisper that time itself is broken. And while all this unfolds, somewhere in Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire carries on, at least at first. Emperor Justinian, still fresh in his ambitious reign, is focused on law reforms and cathedral building. He hasn't seen the countryside. He hasn't smelled the rot. But the reports will come soon enough. There's a weird moment of denial. In the marketplaces of Antioch and Alexandria, people joke about the weather, at least in the early months. They compare it to stories their grandparents told. "Ah, remember the cold snap of 20-something," they say, half laughing. But it's not the same. It never warms. The light doesn't return. Quirky fact. In some records, monks across Britain and Gaul describe lighting candles even at noon. One scribe writes that chickens began roosting by lunchtime, confused by the endless dusk. It's almost funny, until you realize what comes next. At night, people stare up at skies they can't read anymore. Constellations blur. The stars seem more vivid against the dark ceiling, but they offer no guidance. Just cold sparkle. And then there's the silence. Nature, usually loud in summer, crickets, frogs, birdsong, buzzing, goes quiet. Forests sound empty. Rivers run low, slow. It's a stillness that doesn't comfort. It unsettles. As autumn approaches, the rumors start flowing faster than the rivers. Breadlines in Rome, ration riots in Persia, migration out of northern regions where entire villages have given up on planting anything at all. No one has words for climate collapse. Not yet. But they feel it. They live it. And underneath it all, something invisible is already stirring. An uninvited guest, carried on flea-covered rats, biding its time in the shadows. But we'll get to that. For now, the world in 536 is holding its breath, waiting for the sun to return, hoping it's just a bad year. But this isn't just a bad year. It's the year. And it's only just begun. The year drags forward, and the world becomes stranger with every passing day. In what should be the brightness of spring and the lush bounty of summer, the lands instead offer bleakness. The haze still hasn't lifted. The sun still refuses to shine. Crops, confused by the lack of warmth and light, stall in the soil like they've forgotten how to grow. The trees, those reliable green calendars, remain bare or grow only sparse, sickly leaves. People are no longer just worried. They are scared. And not in a poetic, medieval drama kind of way. This is deep, bone-marrow fear, the sort that makes a person forget how to hope. In villages and towns, rumors begin to replace news. Was this the end of days? Was God angry? Had demons stolen the sun? Had dragons finally awakened and taken roost above the clouds? No one really knows. In China's Wei Kingdom, official records note a haunting detail: yellow dust rained like snow. It clung to rooftops, drifted through the air, and settled into lungs. Even the royal court had to acknowledge it. The emperor's advisors debated whether they should interpret it as divine punishment, or just a really, really bad sign. And in India, things aren't any better. Historical chronicles there record a strange dimming of the sun and chilling cold in the summer months. The Ganges slows. Harvests fail. Some astrologers blame shadowy forces, celestial alignments, or ill-timed rituals. Temples overflow with offerings as people desperately try to bargain with the universe. Meanwhile, over in Byzantium, life becomes more fragile. While the capital city still glimmers with mosaics and incense, even the heart of the empire can't hide from what's happening. The markets grow quieter. Grain becomes precious. And Justinian, still committed to his grand reconstruction of Roman glory, begins receiving reports from the front lines. Soldiers are cold, supply chains are thinning, and local governors are begging for help. Historians still argue whether the strange darkness was a single, massive volcanic eruption, likely from Iceland, or a series of smaller events spread across the globe. A few even speculate that a comet or asteroid strike could have stirred up enough debris to create this persistent atmospheric gloom. What's certain is this: the particles were so fine, so widespread, and so high in the atmosphere that they changed the way the Earth breathed. Sunlight couldn't get in. Heat couldn't stay. Temperatures plummet. Not just a little. By 2, even 3 degrees Celsius in some places. That might sound mild on paper, but in reality, it's devastating. Especially in the 6th century, when food preservation is guesswork, infrastructure is weak, and heating means firewood, which is now running low. Snow falls in Mesopotamia. Frost creeps across the Nile. And in parts of Britain and Gaul, the rivers freeze so solid that traders begin crossing them on foot. It's beautiful, in a way, like the world is covered in glass. But beauty is no substitute for food. In Scandinavia, whole communities retreat from their homesteads, abandoning frozen farmland and seeking shelter in valleys, caves, or the warmer south. Tribal movements intensify. People who once warred over borders now march side by side, simply trying to survive. And then comes one of the weirder facts. In some Scandinavian myths, there's a memory of a long winter that lasts 3 years, called Fimbulvita, said to precede the end of the world. Historians still wonder whether this ancient tale echoes something real, a folk memory of 536 and the years that followed. Back in the Mediterranean, once the bright stage of classical civilization, the darkness starts to dull even culture. Plays are cancelled. Festivals shrink. Schools close when there's not enough fuel to keep the rooms warm. Even the church begins to shift its tone. Instead of sermons promising abundance and divine favor, priests begin talking more about repentance, humility, and preparing for judgment. You can almost hear it in the wind, the grinding of gears, the slow shudder of a civilization trying not to fall apart. And yet, in the chaos, small things keep happening. In Constantinople, Justinian completes his crown jewel, the Hagia Sophia. A magnificent dome, rising against the same grey skies that have unnerved so many. It's a monument to order in a time of disorder, a kind of architectural defiance. The walls are lined with gold and coloured marble, meant to reflect divine light. The irony: the light barely makes it through the foggy windows. But people still go. They still kneel. They still pray. Elsewhere, communities try creative solutions. In some Persian regions, farmers experiment with planting later in the year, hoping the cold will lift. In parts of Africa, there's evidence of trade route shifting, people seeking new markets, warmer lands, safer seasons. Survival requires improvisation. And humans, stubborn creatures, are nothing if not inventive. Still, the mood everywhere is clear: this is not normal. And it's not just about climate. Social structures begin to stretch under pressure. In the Eastern Roman Empire, local governors face impossible choices: tax a starving village, or let the treasury run dry. In Central Asia, nomadic tribes once content with their territory begin to migrate, sometimes clashing with neighboring groups. In the British Isles, kings and chieftains reconfigure alliances based not on politics, but on food. And always, above them, the sun stares blankly down, weak, pale, and silent. By the end of 536, it's not just about whether the sun will return. It's whether people will be ready when it does. Because hunger is already on the rise. Disease is close behind. And as the Earth enters 537, still dark, still cold, there's a growing sense that something has shifted permanently. Nature isn't just disrupted. It feels betrayed. The new year begins, but it doesn't feel new. 537 arrives with no fireworks, no celebrations, just another dim morning that looks identical to the last 100. At this point, people no longer ask if the sun will come back. They ask if it was ever truly there to begin with. Children born since the haze began have never seen it shine. To them, light is something that happens only in stories and stained glass windows. In some regions, especially across Europe, the temperature stays cold enough that spring simply doesn't happen. Instead of thaw and bloom, the land remains stiff and quiet. Snow hangs around where it shouldn't. Rain turns to sleet. Soil stays stubborn, and what few crops survived the last season refuse to grow again. The early signs of famine shift into full reality. Food stores run low, grain silos echo with emptiness, and root cellars offer little more than shriveled potatoes and excuses. In Ireland, records speak of a failure of bread for 3 straight years. Not a poetic phrase, an actual collapse of staple food. People get creative and desperate. Across Gaul, villagers grind up bark, weeds, and even acorns to stretch what flour they have. In the Byzantine countryside, there are rumors of leather shoes being boiled into soup. In one Armenian tale, a merchant is accused of using ground bone to fake flour. He denies it. No one can prove it. But no one forgets it. Historians still argue whether these famines were truly global or just patchy regional collapses. But the archaeological record is clear: malnutrition was widespread. Skeletons show signs of starvation, anemia, and growth disruption. You don't need a microscope to see the suffering. Just a skull with sunken cheekbones and enamel flaked by hunger. And then, of course, there's the strange fog. Still present. Still spreading. It's around this time that writers begin to record the psychological toll. Not just physical hunger, but spiritual erosion. People begin to talk less. Songs become quieter. Rituals become fewer. In some regions, even religious festivals are scaled back, not out of lack of faith, but from sheer exhaustion. But nature isn't done yet. Another volcanic eruption, this time in 540, likely from Central America, delivers a fresh hit of atmospheric sulfur. The skies, which had only just started to lighten in some places, go dim again. The world plunges into what's now being called a double volcanic winter, and it cements the 540s as a lost decade. And with cold, of course, comes disease. Enter the rats. You probably weren't hoping for rats. But here they are, small, persistent, and hungry, just like everyone else. And unlike humans, rats adapt fast. As stores of food become rarer and cities grow dirtier, rats move in. They leave their nests, scurry through granaries, and crawl along the eaves of now empty homes. They aren't picky, and they travel far. But the real trouble? They're fleas. Fleas, as most people still don't know, carry something far worse than an itch. A bacterium, later known as Yersinia pestis, has been brewing silently in their tiny blood-sucking bodies. And as rats become more common in towns, so do the fleas. And then, inevitably, they leap to humans. The first signs are subtle: a cough here, a fever there, a swollen neck, a rash. Nothing new in a world used to illness. But then entire households start to fall ill at once. Priests begin to anoint the dead faster than they can record their names. Still, that's getting ahead of ourselves. Back in 537, while the plague is still warming up backstage, the cultural world is starting to flicker. Art doesn't stop. Humans are stubborn about beauty, but it begins to change. Gone are the bright reds, the joyful festivals, the ornate banquets painted on walls. What appears instead are images of judgment, of endurance, of survival. In monasteries, scribes don't just copy scripture, they add prayers in the margins. One famous monk in Northumbria draws a burning sun with tears streaming from it. Another, in Egypt, writes about a dream in which the sky was an iron curtain, sealing man from heaven. In Rome, which is no longer the empire's political center but still holds spiritual power, the Pope writes letters calling for repentance and mercy. He doesn't name the fog or the cold, but he doesn't have to. Everyone knows. A quirky fact buried in church records. In some regions, cats, especially black ones, are blamed for the sun's disappearance. A few villages in Germania reportedly conduct organized purges of sky demons, believed to be hiding in feline form. Needless to say, this does not help the rat situation. By now, even the upper class starts to feel the pinch. Nobles can't buy wheat that doesn't exist. Horse feed vanishes. Entire estates shut down their kitchens. And with roads collapsing from lack of maintenance, trade falters. Caravans are fewer. Ships wait at empty harbors. Byzantium's economy begins to sputter. Emperor Justinian, ever ambitious, tries to keep order. He issues grain subsidies. He enforces price caps. He even opens imperial granaries. But the system was never built for this kind of breakdown. It's like trying to bandage a shipwreck. And in all this darkness, literal and metaphorical, communities begin to turn inward. Suspicion grows. Neighbors eye one another warily. In some places, outsiders are blamed for the sun's disappearance. In others, women accused of witchcraft are driven from villages. No trials, just whispers and torches. Historians debate whether this social paranoia was widespread or exaggerated in the sources, but the pattern feels eerily familiar. When people lose control, they look for someone to blame. But there's also resilience. Families huddle together around what firewood they have. Elders tell stories from warmer times. Children are taught how to dig snow trenches and identify edible roots. The sick are tended to, however clumsily. And in churches and temples across 3 continents, people keep praying. Some because they believe. Some because they don't know what else to do. The year 537 ends not with disaster, but with fatigue. The sun remains dull. The crops remain quiet. But people, somehow, still remain. And in the silence, the rats begin to multiply. Now it's 5:38, and the earth is still cloaked in a shadow that seems to stretch not just across the sky, but across time itself. It's hard to say when exactly the food runs out in any one place. Some towns may have managed to stretch supplies with clever planning. Others, less lucky, or more trusting, succumb earlier. But by now, it's not just villages in Ireland or fields in Syria that are going hungry. It's cities, trade hubs, fortified castles. Even monasteries begin to suffer. Their once generous pantries reduced to echoing storerooms and desperate rationing. Hunger has a way of making people strange. Polite manners falter. Barter gets uglier. Fistfights over loaves of stale barley bread become common enough that some local markets shut down entirely. In more isolated regions, families abandon their homes in search of food elsewhere, often ending up as refugees knocking on already burdened city gates. Some are turned away. Some are allowed in, but only if they have something to offer. A tool, a goat, a daughter. Monks in Constantinople record prayers that shift sharply in tone. No longer are they asking for enlightenment or spiritual guidance. They are pleading, "Give us bread," one scroll reads, "or give us mercy in death." Historians still argue whether the famine of 538 marked a turning point or simply another painful milestone in a grim procession. But it's around this time that the first whispers of societal unraveling become undeniable. Grain riots break out in major cities. Not huge, not Rome-burning revolts, but bursts of chaos. Bakeries are looted. Warehouses mysteriously catch fire. One governor in Egypt, faced with a particularly bad season, flees his post rather than face the mob. In the countryside, abandoned farms rot. No one plants. No one harvests. Wolves begin venturing into empty villages, sniffing around burnt-out homes. In one strange account from a Slavic settlement, the locals reportedly set up decoy food carts filled with ash to trick desperate raiders, or hungry spirits. The sources are vague. And in the markets that remain open, what passes for currency begins to shift. Gold still has value, sure, but not nearly as much as dried meat, honey, or, oddly enough, salt. Salt keeps food fresh. Salt keeps people alive. Salt becomes power. Across the Danube, warlords and tribal leaders quickly pick up on this. Some strike deals. Others strike cities. They take what they need. Sometimes they leave survivors. Sometimes they don't. It depends on the mood, the spoils, and whether their own people are watching. Honor's flexible when your children haven't eaten. Meanwhile, in the forests and mountains of Europe, entire communities vanish. Later chroniclers will write them off as lost to the cold. But archaeological digs find no signs of battle or disaster, just signs of hasty departure. Empty hearths, scattered tools, a child's shoe left behind. No one knows where they went. Maybe south. Maybe nowhere. The fog, though it fluctuates, never fully lifts. And sunlight, that old friend, remains a rumor. In the east, things aren't much better. Persia, caught between Justinian's ambitions and its own fragile climate, begins to buckle. The great city of Ctesiphon grows quiet. Trade with India slows. Caravans from Arabia thin out. Silk becomes rare. Spice prices triple. And across Mesopotamia, stories spread of the Tigris itself turning black with soot after mysterious firestorm far upstream. Scholars debate the cause. A dust storm? A volcanic wind? A divine omen? The river eventually clears, but people don't forget. In the highlands of Anatolia, shepherds report sheep refusing to give milk. The animals taste the sky, one man is recorded saying, and find it bitter. It's probably a metaphor, but maybe not. A strange fringe account from the steppes, dubious, but persistent, mentions a tribe that tried to burn the fog away by lighting massive fires and sacrificing livestock. All they accomplished, unfortunately, was attracting every hungry animal in a 10-mile radius. Not great. And while nature rebels, the gears of empire grind on. Justinian, still wearing his grand imperial robes and brooding beneath the Hagia Sophia's mighty dome, continues his campaign to reclaim the western provinces. He sends generals, supplies, gold, much of which probably could have fed his citizens. But power, as always, has its priorities. In 538, his forces win several key victories in Italy. But what they also win are hungry, plague-ridden cities too weak to celebrate. His dream of a restored Roman Empire starts to look like a patchwork of sick towns and starving outposts. And then come the omens. In Anch, a church is struck by lightning during Mass, setting the roof ablaze. In Thessalonica, blood reportedly rains for 3 minutes. The local bishop calls it a miracle. Others call it a warning. In Ireland, a tree is found blooming in winter, but the fruit rots as soon as it touches the ground. Locals bury it, whispering prayers. Historians argue whether these tales are exaggerations or heavily mythologized recollections of natural phenomena. But in an age without weather satellites or science blogs, these moments matter. They shape the collective psyche. People begin to believe the world isn't just sick, it's dying. Yet through it all, there are glimmers of grit. A village in the Alps, cut off by snow, reportedly survives a brutal season on fermented goat's milk and pine bark. They keep warm by digging communal dens into the hillsides. In Egypt, clever irrigation saves a handful of farms along the Nile, and the surplus is shared, not sold, by a particularly generous priest who becomes something of a local legend. In Byzantium, a midwife's journal from this year survives. It's short, fragile, written on worn vellum, but it records births. 6 babies, named for light, fire, and hope. Their families don't expect much, but they name them anyway. Because naming things is a way of claiming that they matter, even when the world says otherwise. The year closes with silence. No big war. No new plague, yet. Just cold. Hunger. And waiting. Always the waiting. And in that quiet, the earth keeps spinning. The fog shifts. The rats settle in. The fleas multiply. and the world inches closer to something much worse. It's 539 now, and the slow-motion disaster continues like a bad dream that just won't end. The fog is still there, thick and unyielding, turning days into endless dusk. The sun, if anyone remembers it at all, is a pale memory, more ghost than star. It no longer feels like a natural cycle, more like a cosmic prank with no punchline. By now, the cold has carved deep grooves into the seasons. Spring, if it ever arrives, is a chilly mirage. Summer is a short, grey gasp. Autumn sneaks past in muted tones. Winter is relentless. Even the strongest trees begin to lose their fight, their leaves shriveling on the branches or falling early, leaving skeletal limbs against a heavy sky. Farmers, if they can still be called that, start to shift strategies. They turn to hardier crops, millet instead of wheat, barley instead of rye. Some try to grow vegetables in greenhouses heated by wood fires. But wood is scarce, and fires are expensive. It's a gamble, one few can afford. Worse, livestock numbers begin to drop dramatically. Sheep and cattle succumb to cold or disease. Birds fail to migrate or simply don't return. The animal world is quieting, echoing the human struggle. The food shortages now affect even cities that once seemed like fortresses of plenty. Constantinople, the jewel of the empire, finds its markets less crowded, its granaries emptier. Official rations are cut. The palace kitchens turn to more humble dishes. Some courtiers reportedly begin hoarding food, while others fall ill from malnutrition. One fascinating note from this time comes from a Byzantine physician named Alexander of Tralles, who writes about mysterious fevers sweeping through parts of Asia Minor. It's not yet the plague, but the symptoms sound eerily familiar: swollen lymph nodes, sudden chills, headaches. He advises quarantine, herbal remedies, and prayer. His writings survive and become crucial later. Meanwhile, social tensions rise sharply. Riots over food and fuel flare intermittently, often quelled only by force. In one recorded incident, a merchant convoy traveling from Egypt to Greece is ambushed by bandits desperate enough to kill for grain sacks. In another, a farmer's daughter is accused of witchcraft after a bad harvest, and barely escapes a lynching. Historians still debate whether these social collapses were isolated or systemic. The evidence is patchy, but the pattern is clear. Hunger makes neighbors suspicious, and suspicion makes societies fragile. Trade routes fray. The once bustling Silk Road becomes sporadic, more rumor than reality. Merchants stop risking their caravans across barren stretches. Sea trade, too, slows as pirates take advantage of weakened navies. The Mediterranean, once a highway of wealth and culture, becomes a haunted, empty road. A quirky detail emerges from this period. Some communities begin hoarding salt not just for preservation, but as a form of currency and even as a ritual offering to gods or ancestors. Salt stones are buried beneath hearths to keep the house safe during these dark times. In the East, the Sassanid Empire wrestles with similar struggles. Heavy rains flood parts of Persia, ruining harvests, while droughts parch others. The royal court sends envoys to China, seeking trade and alliances, but communication delays stretch months. The world feels fragmented, disconnected, and vulnerable. The fog sometimes reveals strange optical phenomena. People report mock suns, bright halos, or eerie glows at twilight. Some interpret these as signs of divine anger. Others, as just another trick of a weary eye. Religion becomes a double-edged sword. For many, faith is a comfort, a lifeline. Churches and temples see increased attendance as people seek meaning. But for others, the silence of the heavens breeds doubt and despair. Apocalyptic sermons grow louder, warning that the end is near. And yet, amid the bleakness, life continues in small, stubborn ways. Communities barter what little they have. A weaver trades cloth for grain. A blacksmith mends tools for salted fish. Children play, ignoring the cold with surprising resilience. Stories are told, songs are sung, and even laughter breaks through occasionally. One remarkable story comes from a monastery in Egypt, where monks keep detailed weather logs, recording the fog, the temperature drops, and the state of crops. Their dedication to observation will later provide scientists with crucial clues about this period's climate. But the rats grow bolder. By 539, their numbers have exploded. They thrive in the dark corners of cities, in granaries half empty of grain but full of crumbs. They scurry under floorboards, nest in walls, and multiply without mercy. Fleas, their silent passengers, spread further than anyone can see. People notice that the mysterious fevers and swollen buboes now appear in more locations. Some call it the plague, but most have no idea what it truly means. It's just another shadow in the growing gloom. As the year ends, the world waits again, this time for a storm far worse than cold or famine. It is 540, and the world teeters on a knife's edge. By this point, the mysterious cold and fog have become the new normal. The sun's feeble light barely warms the earth, and the growing season is a cruel joke. In many places, fields lie fallow, farms abandoned, and granaries empty. But more ominous than hunger or cold is the invisible enemy creeping quietly through the cities and countryside, the early stages of the plague of Justinian. No one yet understands the connection between rats, fleas, and the terrifying illness that spreads from town to town, village to village. But the symptoms begin appearing in droves: fevers, chills, swollen lymph nodes, and blackened skin patches that give the plague its haunting nickname centuries later. Byzantium, the empire's heart, feels the first crushing blows. In Constantinople, crowded streets become death traps. Families lock themselves indoors, only to find the plague waiting in the air or on the skin of servants and traders. Public gatherings are banned, but rumors and panic spread faster than any edict. Emperor Justinian himself is not immune. Accounts tell of him narrowly escaping infection thanks to a quick-acting physician and a rather stubborn immunity, or possibly just luck. Yet the emperor's ambitions suffer. The plague weakens his armies, slows his campaigns, and drains the treasury. The dream of a restored Roman Empire dims under the weight of pestilence. But it's not just the emperor and his soldiers who suffer. Across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, entire communities are devastated. Burial pits overflow. Priests and healers fall ill or flee. Trade grinds to a halt. The economy, already fragile from famine and cold, collapses. A quirky but unsettling detail from this time comes from the writings of Procopius, the historian who describes rats as plagues in themselves, and notes how the vermin spread the disease more than any human fault. Procopius's vivid descriptions of the sick, their blackened buboes, and the terrifying speed of death send shivers through modern readers. Historians still argue over the precise origins of the plague, whether it began in Africa, Asia, or somewhere in between, but its effects are undeniable and catastrophic. Meanwhile, the natural world continues its downward spiral. Crops fail in cycles, and the cold persists with no relief. The fog occasionally lifts, only to return thicker than before. In some areas, floods follow droughts in a dizzying display of environmental chaos. In the midst of this despair, some religious leaders interpret the plague as divine punishment for human sins. Sermons grow darker. Pilgrimages increase. But so do heresies and sects promising salvation or escape, causing social and religious tensions to flare. Interestingly, despite the devastation, some art and literature flourish in this time of crisis, grim but profound. Poets and scribes capture the fear and faith of their people, creating works that will inspire centuries later. Back in the cities, people begin to develop primitive quarantine measures, isolating the sick in homes or makeshift hospitals. But with little understanding of contagion, these efforts are often ineffective. The plague's arrival signals not just a health crisis, but a fundamental shift in society. The dense urban centers that once thrived under Roman organization now face depopulation and decay. Trade routes fragment. Political structures weaken. The year closes under a pall of fear and loss. The sun remains a pale witness to humanity's struggle. The fog and cold persist. And the rats, silent carriers of death, multiply unchecked. Yet, life stubbornly persists. Some families still cling to hope. Some communities still find moments of peace. But the world is changing, irrevocably, and the worst is still to come. The year is now 541, and the plague of Justinian has officially exploded across the Byzantine Empire, sending shockwaves through the ancient world. This isn't just any sickness, it's a swift and deadly plague, with victims falling ill within days and many dying within a week. It spreads through trade routes, ports, and crowded cities like wildfire, leaving despair and empty homes in its wake. Constantinople, the empire's bustling capital, is particularly hard hit. Streets once crowded with merchants and citizens are now eerily silent, except for the sound of carts hauling away the dead. The famed hippodrome empties. Markets close. People are afraid to even touch their neighbors. Procopius, who chronicled these dark days, wrote that the plague carried off a greater number than the diseases of any previous age. He estimated tens of thousands dying weekly at the height of the outbreak, a staggering number for a city of roughly 500,000. This unprecedented mortality rate weakens not only the population but also the military, administrative, and economic systems. Soldiers fall ill, supply lines break down, and food shortages worsen. The empire's defenses along its borders grow thin, vulnerable to attacks. Historians still argue over how much the plague directly contributed to the eventual fall of the Western Roman territories and the shift into the so-called Dark Ages. But there's no doubt it accelerated decline. The disease's spread reveals the fragility of human networks once considered invincible. From the docks of Alexandria to the ports of Ravenna, ships bring death as easily as goods. People begin to avoid travel altogether, further isolating communities. Oddly, some regions report less severe outbreaks, sparking debate among scholars about immunity, climate effects, or social practices. Was it luck, better hygiene, or something else? A strange but poignant detail. Some survivors report haunting dreams of rats or shadowy figures, leading to local superstitions and rituals intended to ward off the pestilence. In one village, residents carry iron charms and burn incense, hoping to keep the invisible threat at bay. Meanwhile, nature continues its cruel tricks. Crop failures persist due to erratic weather patterns. Famine spreads alongside disease, creating a perfect storm of misery. Interestingly, despite the devastation, there are moments of resilience. Some physicians attempt primitive quarantines, and monasteries offer care for the sick, even as their own numbers dwindle. In this year of horror, the empire's morale hits rock bottom. Yet, the will to survive, stubborn and fierce, remains. People cling to faith, family, and fleeting moments of normalcy wherever they can find them. As 541 fades, the world has changed forever, shadowed by death, uncertainty, and a slow but relentless transformation that will shape the centuries to come. It's 542, and the plague is no longer just a tragedy, it's a relentless force reshaping the world. By now, the death toll has reached staggering heights. Some estimates say up to half the population of the Byzantine Empire has perished, with entire towns wiped off the map. The streets of Constantinople are littered with abandoned homes, carts overflowing with bodies, and a silence so heavy it feels like the city itself is mourning. The economic impact is catastrophic. Trade grinds to a halt as ports close and merchants refuse to travel. Agricultural production collapses further, not just because of the lingering cold and famine, but because farmers, old, young, and strong, have fallen ill or died. Fields lie barren, and food prices skyrocket. Hunger and disease form a vicious, unending cycle. The military is stretched beyond breaking. Borders are left vulnerable as soldiers vanish. The empire's ambitions to reclaim lost Western territories stall, with campaigns abandoned or postponed indefinitely. Procopius's accounts grow darker. He describes a city where even dogs and cats grow thin from starvation, and people resort to desperate measures to survive, from scavenging refuse to selling their own possessions or children. At the same time, religious fervor intensifies. Churches become places not just of worship but of refuge and care. Monks and nuns tend the sick, risking infection themselves. Pilgrimages spike as people seek divine intervention, but the growing number of deaths fuels fears that the gods, or God, have turned away. The plague does not discriminate, but it exposes and deepens societal fractures. The wealthy try to isolate themselves behind walls and servants. The poor crowd together in squalid quarters, where disease thrives. An intriguing detail from this period involves burial practices. Overwhelmed by the sheer number of dead, city officials and families resort to mass graves. Archaeologists later find these pits, packed with hundreds of skeletons, revealing the sheer scale of loss. Historians debate the extent to which this plague outbreak contributed to the eventual transformation of European societies, from urban centers to more rural, feudal systems, as populations shrink and political structures falter. Meanwhile, in distant China, reports from the Sui dynasty described their own struggles with climate anomalies and famine, though not yet plague. This suggests the chaos of the 530s and 540s was a global phenomenon, a planetary crisis playing out in different, interconnected ways. Amidst this darkness, however, some cultural and technological innovations take root. For instance, the need for better medical knowledge encourages the study and documentation of diseases, herbal remedies, and sanitation practices, even if these early efforts fall far short of modern standards. And so, the world keeps turning beneath a thick sky, with lives hanging by threads, communities breaking and reforming, and the shadow of plague looming large. By 543, the fog, cold, and plague have combined to rewrite the rules of existence. The known world feels smaller, quieter, and darker. Cities continue to empty, and with them, the bustling centers of art, trade, and power dwindle into echoes of their former selves. Constantinople struggles to hold on to its grandeur, but even the great palace feels the weight of decline. The once bright mosaics and marble halls seem dim under the clouded skies and thick, hanging fog. But this is not just an empire unraveling, it's a social fabric tearing in countless places. The plague's reach stretches beyond death. It shakes faith in leaders and gods alike. People wonder aloud whether Justinian's rule is a blessing or a curse, whether prayers and rituals hold any power against such overwhelming calamity. Yet, human nature's stubborn spark persists. Some families flee the cities to try their luck in rural areas, hoping isolation will protect them. Others double down, clustering in small villages, forming tight-knit communities bound by shared loss and mutual aid. One of the quirky notes from this period involves the rise of apotropaic charms and talismans, objects believed to ward off evil or disease. People carry amulets shaped like animals or ancient symbols, hoping that a little superstition might keep the plague's invisible claws at bay. Some merchants even sell plague masks filled with herbs and spices, a precursor to later medical masks, though their effectiveness is doubtful. Meanwhile, the environmental chaos continues. Crops remain unpredictable, with floods, droughts, and frost all playing their part in frustrating harvests. Rivers occasionally change course, and reports of strange weather patterns come from far-flung places, suggesting a planet-wide disturbance. Historians still argue about how much these environmental factors contributed to the plague's spread versus human factors like trade and urban density. It's likely a complex cocktail of causes, all reinforcing each other. Interestingly, art from this era often features more somber and reflective themes, images of suffering, death, and the fragile human condition. The dark skies above may have influenced not only moods but artistic styles. Trade, though crippled, slowly tries to find new routes and methods. Some merchants turn to overland paths through less affected regions. Others attempt to revive sea trade, though piracy and naval weakness make voyages perilous. Politically, the empire's administrative apparatus strains under the weight of lost personnel and resources. Tax collection becomes erratic. Local officials sometimes wield more power than distant emperors, signaling the fragmentation of centralized authority. In the East, the Sassanid Empire and China continue to navigate their own crises, sometimes in parallel, sometimes diverging. Communication between these vast regions remains intermittent but important for understanding the global context. This year is a grim reminder that even the mightiest civilizations are vulnerable to forces beyond their control. Yet, despite the despair, the human instinct to adapt, survive, and hope flickers quietly beneath the surface. It is now 544, and the plague's shadow continues to darken the world, but subtle shifts hint at the slow, grinding resilience of humanity. By this time, the plague has ebbed and flowed in waves, striking hard and then receding, only to return again. Some survivors report immunity, though science of the era is powerless to explain this. The idea of herd immunity is centuries away, so people simply hope to be among the lucky ones. Cities like Constantinople begin to see faint signs of recovery. Markets cautiously reopen, though trade is still a fragile thread. Farmers start planting again, despite unpredictable weather. The desperate barter system persists, but with more stability than the chaos of the previous years. A remarkable detail from this year involves the arrival of large numbers of refugees fleeing devastated regions. These displaced people spread knowledge, traditions, and even seeds, both agricultural and cultural, reshaping communities they join. The Byzantine bureaucracy struggles to adapt, shifting tax policies and land ownership rules to accommodate the new realities. Large estates consolidate as small farms disappear, sowing the seeds for feudal systems to come. This economic transformation is slow but profound, setting the stage for medieval Europe. Religious institutions grow more powerful, offering charity and structure. Monasteries become centers of learning and refuge, preserving texts and knowledge that might otherwise vanish in the turmoil. Interestingly, some scholars speculate that the 536 to 544 crisis period accelerated technological and intellectual changes that would later fuel the Renaissance, though that spark remains buried beneath centuries of hardship. Natural phenomena continue to surprise. Reports of unusual auroras and sky glows are recorded, perhaps due to volcanic activity or solar storms. Some communities take these as signs of hope or warning, fueling diverse interpretations. Historians still argue over the scale and duration of these volcanic events and their direct impact on climate and society. Ice core samples from Greenland and Antarctica provide evidence, but interpretations vary. Amid all this, everyday life tries to reassert itself. Children play, merchants haggle, and families mourn while planning for a future they can barely imagine. The world remains precarious, but the stubborn pulse of life beats on. By 545, the slow, fragile pulse of life in a world battered by plague and climate change begins to weave new patterns of society, even as darkness still clings to many corners. The plague has not disappeared, but its intensity has somewhat lessened. Survivors navigate a landscape that is as unfamiliar as it is threatening. Urban centers, though diminished, still stand as beacons of culture and commerce, yet the population shifts toward rural areas, where life is harsh but isolation offers some protection. In Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire, efforts to rebuild and reinforce the city gain momentum. Emperor Justinian, though aging and weary, pursues ambitious projects including churches and fortifications. Hagia Sophia, the empire's architectural marvel, is completed in this era, standing as a testament to human endurance and faith amid chaos. Yet, the empire's power is clearly diminished. Tax revenues have plummeted, and military campaigns falter. Border defenses along the Danube and eastern frontiers weaken, inviting pressure from rival powers. In other regions, societies adapt in unexpected ways. Some local leaders gain autonomy as centralized control fades. New customs and social norms arise as communities learn to rely more on kinship and local governance. A quirky tidbit from this time: some communities develop primitive plague hospitals or isolation wards, where the sick are separated from healthy populations. These early quarantines, though rudimentary, hint at humanity's first attempts to control infectious diseases. Meanwhile, environmental chaos persists. Reports of unseasonable storms and cold winters continue to trouble farmers and fishermen alike. Some historians suggest that volcanic activity in this period may have been among the largest in recorded history, possibly erupting in Iceland or North America, though exact locations remain debated. Historians still argue about how much of this period's devastation was due to climate versus social and economic factors. The complexity of intertwined crises defies simple explanation. Interestingly, while much of Europe drifts toward what will later be called the Dark Ages, the Eastern Roman Empire maintains pockets of relative stability and cultural flowering, preserving ancient knowledge and arts. In China, the Sui dynasty faces its own challenges, with internal strife and environmental stress shaping its fate, illustrating that the 530s and 540s were truly a global time of trial. As this year closes, humanity's endurance shines faint but undeniable, a candle flickering against the relentless winds of fate. It is now 546, and the fog of the previous decade has mostly lifted, but its scars remain etched across the lands and peoples who survived. The plague lingers, but its terrifying early momentum slows. People have learned to live with the threat, developing routines and superstitions to manage fear. Pilgrimages continue, monasteries serve as hospitals, and prayers fill the air, both in hope and desperation. The social landscape is shifting markedly. The population decline has altered labor dynamics. With fewer hands to work the fields, wages rise in some areas, and landowners adjust their holdings. This shift foreshadows the slow transformation of medieval feudal systems. In the Byzantine Empire, Emperor Justinian's health declines. Despite setbacks from plague and war, his reign leaves a legacy of legal reform and monumental architecture. But the empire's fragile hold on its territories grows more tenuous. One fascinating yet eerie detail involves the use of plague pits, large communal graves used to handle overwhelming numbers of dead. Archaeological finds of these sites reveal the scale of the catastrophe and how societies struggled with mass death. Historians still debate how these burial practices influenced religious beliefs and funerary customs in later centuries. Did the trauma change how people viewed death and the afterlife? The answer remains elusive. Elsewhere, climate anomalies persist. Harsh winters, erratic rains, and food shortages plague Europe and Asia. Some scholars suggest a massive volcanic eruption in 540 or 541 AD may have triggered these climate shifts, but pinpointing exact events is complicated. In art and literature, themes of suffering, mortality, and divine judgment dominate, reflecting collective trauma. Manuscripts from this time are rare but reveal a poignant blend of despair and hope. Trade routes begin cautious reopening, but the collapse of networks during the worst years means many goods, ideas, and people no longer move freely as before. This isolation contributes to regional cultures developing in new and diverse directions. The plague and environmental upheavals expose the fragility of interconnected civilizations, but they also highlight human adaptability. Communities learn new ways to survive, even if the future looks uncertain. Amid these struggles, faint glimmers of resilience appear. Families rebuild homes, farmers experiment with crops, and knowledge is cautiously preserved. The world is changed, scarred, but not defeated. By 547, the world shaped by years of darkness is still in flux. caught between devastation and the slow emergence of new patterns of life. The plague, though less ferocious, has settled into a haunting presence, an invisible companion in daily life. Some areas see recurrent outbreaks, while others begin to heal, their populations stabilizing after years of steep decline. In Constantinople, the empire grapples with a new reality, weakened but enduring. Emperor Justinian's ambitious dreams of restoration have been undercut by plague and rebellion, but his legal and architectural legacies persist. The Hagia Sophia stands proud, a beacon amid uncertainty. Social structures adjust further. Local authorities and landowners grow in power as central imperial control weakens, a shift that historians see as a key moment in the transition from Roman order to medieval feudalism. In more remote regions, rural life becomes dominant. Communities rely on kinship ties, oral traditions, and local customs more than distant rulers or markets. This localization shapes the future political and cultural landscape. A curious practice emerges. In some areas, people begin to bury plague victims with personal belongings or tokens, perhaps in hopes of protecting their spirits or aiding their passage in the afterlife. This practice varies widely, revealing diverse cultural responses to death. Environmental disruptions persist but show signs of easing. After nearly a decade of climatic upheaval, summers become somewhat more reliable, and crops, though still vulnerable, start to yield more predictably. Historians still debate whether the volcanic activity that initiated this crisis was a singular event or a series of eruptions over years. This question affects how we understand the interplay between environment and society during this period. Trade and communication begin cautiously resuming along old routes and new paths. Some silk roads reopen, bringing goods, and perhaps diseases, back into circulation, weaving distant worlds once more. Amid these challenges, cultural life quietly endures. Monasteries preserve knowledge, scribes copy texts, and oral storytelling flourishes, keeping history, myth, and identity alive despite the turmoil. In the larger picture, the events of the mid-6th century mark a profound turning point, a world forced to confront vulnerability and change, setting the stage for centuries of transformation, conflict, and resilience. The year is 548, and the lingering echoes of catastrophe still ripple through daily life, yet the human spirit quietly persists beneath the weight of loss. Though the plague no longer dominates headlines, isolated outbreaks continue to strike, reminding survivors of the fragility of health and society. People navigate a world where death remains close but less omnipresent, and hope slowly creeps back into the collective consciousness. In Constantinople, rebuilding efforts continue with careful optimism. Public works, including roads and aqueducts, are repaired, and markets tentatively pulse with renewed life. Yet the scars of the past decade linger in empty homes and diminished families. The social order continues to evolve. With labor scarce, peasants and workers find new bargaining power, slowly shifting the dynamics of power between classes. These subtle shifts foreshadow the gradual erosion of old Roman hierarchies. A fascinating cultural detail emerges from this period. In some regions, festivals and rituals begin incorporating remembrance of the plague dead, blending grief with celebration, a way to process trauma and strengthen community bonds. Climate anomalies have lessened, but unusual weather patterns remind people of their vulnerability to nature's whims. Agricultural innovations begin to spread, including crop rotation and new tools, signaling a gradual adaptation to changing conditions. Historians still debate the extent to which these crises permanently altered Europe's demographic and cultural trajectory. Some argue that the population bottleneck allowed for genetic and cultural shifts. Others emphasize continuity amid change. Trade networks cautiously expand. Mediterranean routes see increased activity, though piracy and political instability continue to pose challenges. New alliances form as local rulers seek to secure resources and stability. Elsewhere, outside Europe, powerful empires like the Sassanids and emerging Tang dynasty in China adapt to their own pressures, reflecting the interconnectedness of this turbulent century. Throughout all these changes, storytelling, art, and religion remain vital. Monasteries preserve ancient texts, local bards recount legends, and churches offer both sanctuary and social structure, guiding people through uncertainty. The mid-6th century remains a complex mosaic of hardship and resilience, a world forever altered, yet slowly reclaiming its rhythm. By 549, the world that endured the darkest decade in recorded history is slowly stepping into a new era, one defined by both loss and unexpected renewal. Though the plague is no longer a raging storm, its aftershocks persist in depopulated cities, fractured economies, and transformed social orders. Survivors continue rebuilding homes and lives, often with fewer resources but a clearer sense of adaptability. In Constantinople, the pulse of the empire returns with cautious strength. Trade resumes along Mediterranean routes, markets fill again with goods from distant lands, and artisans begin crafting objects that reflect both tradition and the changed times. Political power remains decentralized in many regions. Local rulers wield greater authority, filling gaps left by weakened central governments. This political fragmentation lays groundwork for the feudal systems that will dominate medieval Europe. Religious life deepens its influence. Christian institutions expand their roles beyond worship, becoming centers of education, charity, and governance. The collective trauma of plague and famine fuels spiritual reflection and drives a surge in church building and monastic life. One intriguing detail from this year, the increased documentation of medical knowledge in monasteries hints at early efforts to understand and control disease, planting seeds for future advances despite limited scientific understanding. Environmental conditions stabilize but remain unpredictable. Farmers experiment cautiously with new crops and techniques, learning hard lessons from the past decade's failures. Historians still debate how directly the crises of 536 to 549 influenced Europe's so-called Dark Ages. Some argue the catastrophes accelerated societal changes that would have happened anyway, while others see them as a defining rupture. Meanwhile, beyond Europe, other great civilizations, China under the Tang dynasty, the Persian Sassanids, are also navigating their own transformations, impacted indirectly by these global disturbances. In the quiet moments of daily life, stories of survival, loss, and hope circulate, oral histories that will shape collective memory for centuries. These tales keep the memory of the darkest years alive, even as new generations look forward. As the world settles into its new rhythm, it remains a place of uncertainty and possibility, shaped forever by the mysterious fog, the chill that gripped continents, and the plague that changed history. As you settle down, imagine the heavy fog lifting slowly, like a veil pulled back to reveal a sky softened by dawn's first light. The world, battered and bruised, breathes out a long, weary sigh, its pulse steadying after a storm no one could have predicted or fully understood. Though the skies once dimmed, warmth returns in gentle waves, sunlight filtering through the branches, the quiet rustle of leaves, the hum of distant life reclaiming space. This long shadow of darkness left its mark, but it also taught something essential about resilience, the stubbornness of life to push through cold and despair, the human heart's capacity to rebuild from ashes, and the way hope can flicker quietly, even when surrounded by ruin. The vast lands and countless lives touched by those years of mystery and plague were forever changed, but they were not broken. Rest now, as the weight of those centuries settles like soft dust on the edges of memory. Tomorrow carries the promise of light, and with it, the endless stories of survival and renewal yet to be told.